Hello, my name is Peter Raymer. Today we're going to talk about how to read a file in D365, specifically Microsoft Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. There's many different ways you can actually read data into D365. That's really helpful whenever you have a lot of data that you need to bring in. Instead of manually typing in lots of values and fields, you can actually import that data into D365. Probably the preferred and most common way is to use the data management framework, to use data entities. Please check out my other videos on what a data entity is and how to create them and how to use them. But in this lesson, we're going to look at how you can read a file more directly. You actually can upload the file using a button and dialog within D365 and then read each row of that file. And this is especially useful in the example we're going to go through is when you've got some kind of comma separated or pipe separated or tab separated file with a bunch of values. So let's get started. So here's an example of the file that we're going to upload today. I just created a silly example where we've got a first name and a last name. And right now I've got it in Excel. You could open it in Notepad, kind of whichever you prefer. But then you can say File, Save As, and then you can give it a name and then specify the type of file you want to save it as. You can save it as a text file or a CSV file. There's other types you can save as well. In this case, we're going to use a CSV. Once I do that, the system's going to actually put commas in between each one of these values. So if I actually go back here and I try to open this with Notepad, I'm going to actually see we do have commas between each of our values. And then what's differentiating each record or line of this data is an end line character. And that's pretty common on these types of files. All right. So let's dive in. I did create a custom table called tutorial names that just has a first name and a last name, and I created a form called tutorial names with a basic grid and a first name and a last name just so we could see this once we're running it. But really what we're going to do is go to accounts receivable, and I'll show you how to add this code, and then go to this menu item called call tutorial upload file. This is what we're going to create in today's lesson, but I wanted you to see kind of what it looks like first up. We can select a file by clicking the browse button, then select the names file, click open. It's going to upload this file, and once it has finished uploading it, it's going to go ahead and run it and upload our data. So now when I come back to our tutorials name form, voila, I have my file loaded in. This is a very simple file. There's other ways you could get this data in, but for the sake of this lesson, we'll keep it simple. All right, let's look at the code. The first code that I actually want to look at is this tutorial upload file. So go ahead and create a new project within Visual Studio. Set that project to your custom model so you can create your own new code. I've got a model called Dynamics 365 Musings. You do that by selecting properties and setting the model. Then go ahead and create a new class. So right click and say add new item. And in this case, I selected Dynamics 365 class, and then you can type in tutorial upload file or whatever you would like to name your file. Then click add. I'm going to cancel out since I've already done that. All right, I've got my class. Now there's really two methods we're going to create as part of this lesson, and I'm going to explain how they work. The first one, we're going to create a method called public void read and process file. You can call it whatever you want. That's just the name that I wanted to give it. The next line we need is this line that uses this variable of type file upload temporary storage result. You can copy and paste this code from the article I created. We then set this variable called upload file result equal to file : get file from user. This is a really special method that does all the work for us. It opens up a dialog, it creates a form control with that browse button, allows us to click that browse button, get a pop-up that shows the directory on our machine, select our file, and then it continues to run this code once the file is uploaded. While you could still create your own custom dialog for this purpose, this is just really awesome because it does all the hard work for us. So I recommend you use this class right here. The next thing we need to do is we need to check, make sure that we got a result, that the file uploaded successfully, and so we've got these two lines right here. If it didn't, we can throw an error and say something like unable to load file. Otherwise, we can call more code. And instead of putting all that same code just within the same if statement, I decided to put it in a separate method just for abstraction and making it easier to read. So I called that method process file, and we'll look at that next. So the very first kind of step is getting this file uploaded. It used to be in previous versions of Dynamics, if you use those, that you could specify a direct location on your computer's hard drive. But now that D365 is running in a browser, that browser does not have direct access to all your files. We really need the browser to have a pop-up where the user actively selects that file. That file then gets uploaded to Azure Temporary Blob Storage, and then it's really that we're working with. This upload file result variable is storing all the details of that file in Azure Blob Storage. All right. One other note that I wanted to make is that if you've seen other examples online, there were classes called .io, .textIO, TextIO, ASCII.io. Those classes are now deprecated. You'll still be able to type them in here, and you can even compile with them, but you'll get a warning message in the build output here that says that those classes have been deprecated and they really won't work anymore. Instead, they've all been replaced with a few other classes with the word stream in it. So we now have TextStreamIO, ASCII-StreamIO, .StreamIO, and .TextStreamIO. And I'll show you how to use that in just a second. But if you're copying code from somewhere else or upgrading code, definitely pay attention to that. So let's get started in explaining this process file method. This process file method takes one parameter. We're passing in the output of our dialog, which is really just all the details of our file that we've uploaded. Next, we're calling this method getDownloadURL on it to get out the URL to that Azure Blob Storage location. Again, we use this really great helper method called useFileFromURL. And what this does is this creates a stream object that we can use to read the data in the file. And then lastly, we really just have to use one of these helper classes. We don't have to. We could create a memory stream ourselves, but I definitely recommend using one of these helper classes. Makes it a lot easier. So in this case, I'm using TextStreamIO. I use a static method construct for read. There's a different one for if you're writing a file. We pass in this stream variable, and in the end we get this TextStreamIO object out that we can work with. And just to clarify, each one of these helper classes are actually very similar, so you can kind of use whichever one you would like. There's just slight differences on what the fields delimiter is. So if you use one of these comma ones, the default field delimiter is going to be a comma as opposed to another type of delimiter. and there's a little bit of a difference of what file encoding the class is going to be able to handle. I kind of like this TextStreamIO because if I kind of drill in here, it's got code in here where if you don't specify the encoding, you can specify it as a second parameter to this constructor, but otherwise it will detect the byte order marks and understand which encoding and what stream reader it should use. So that seems pretty nice to me. All right, so after you've got these three crucial lines of code right here, the next thing we want to specify is the in-field delimiter. That's the value that is separating each field within each record in our file. So in this case, we've got a comma. This could be a pipe or a tab or something else. The other thing we want to specify is the in-record delimiter. And so this /r/n, if you haven't seen it before, this really just represents the end line character that's kind of invisible when you open a notepad. But it's the carriage return, the end of line. This is default, so technically we don't even need this line, but we'll specify it anyway just to be super safe and in case you have a different end of line character. All right, now we get to the fun part of actually reading in each line and looping through it. The first thing we want to do is read in the very first record. If you've got a header record, like where you're specifying what each column name is, such as first name or last name, you're actually going to want to call this infile.read twice so that you're reading in the header and then you're really getting to the first line of code, or the first line of data that you want to read. Okay, next we've really just got this while select statement that is going to loop through and read each record within our file. And we're going to check and keep looping as long as the status is this IO status OK. And this will no longer be true once it's reached to the end of the file. All right, so this infile.read really returns a container that contains each of the fields within our record, splitting them up by this comma. So this is just really helpful. Containers, if you haven't looked them up, they're really cool things within X++, but they can contain different types of data in each field, whether it be a string, an integer, a real, all that good stuff. And so we're really just going to use this little global function called conpeek to look in the container and get out the very first value within this container. This is 1 based, it's not 0 based like many other arrays. So this will get out our first name. I'm just going to store it in a string variable temporarily. Then I'm going to pull out the last name, and I have that now. And just for fun, I'm going to info out the first and last name just for our debugging purposes. Okay, we've really read the data out of our first record. Then this next piece of code is whatever you decide you want to do with that data. In my case, I'm going to check my custom table called tutorial names and see if there already exists a record with that exact same first and last name. If there is, I don't want to do anything further. I'm just going to skip it. But if there's not a record that already exists, I'm going to go ahead and populate this table buffer with a first and last name and then call the insert method on this table buffer to insert this data. And then lastly, I'm going to read the next line of our file. And then it'll continue, the code loop will continue back up to this first line here and do it all over again on each line of our file until we're finished. And that's really it for our code. So again, I think the 3 lines that are most important are these right here. You can really just copy and paste these. It makes it really easy. And then kind of the next 2 that are important is these 2 where you're specifying what the delimiter is. You've got a while loop that you can copy and paste, and then really the insides here you can replace with whatever number of columns you need to read out and whatever data you want to be able to do with it. One more thing. So I've written this great class with this method that can read and process a file. It does the uploading for us, it processes it, but I need a way to actually call this class. And so what I did is I created a new runnable class that can call my class that's more generic that I could use in other purposes as well. And so to create that runnable class, I did add new item, select Dynamics 365, scrolled down to runnable class / job, and I named it call tutorial upload file. You can name it whatever you want. Really the only difference between a runnable class and a regular class is it creates a main method for us, and then you can click add. I already did that, so I'll just cancel and open it up. So when we create the runnable job, it's going to create this empty static void main method for us, which is great. Now all I have to do is instantiate our tutorial upload file class, and then I can call read and process file on it, and it's going to do all the work. And I really just needed to do that because I needed a main method. I could have combined all that in one piece of code, but now I have some code that makes this really reusable. And so this main method can be called by an action menu item. So to create an action menu item, I need to right click on our project, say add new item, Dynamics 365, pick action menu item from this list, and then you can type call tutorial upload file. It's really a best practice to name any menu item after the object that you're going to call. So this is the class we're going to call, so we'll name the action menu item the same. And then you can click add. I'll go ahead and click cancel since I've already done that. I'm going to double click on our action menu item, click on it over here, right click and select properties. Sometimes if you don't do that, these properties are grayed out, so definitely something you want to pay attention to. Then you can give it a label. This is what shows on our end menu, so call tutorial upload file is what I called it. And then we need to set the object type to class. It could be, a form or a report. Form's most common, but in this case we're going to call a class, and then we're going to call our class called call tutorial upload file. So we're kind of working backwards. We've got a class that calls our other class. We've got a menu item that calls this class now, and then lastly we need this menu item to appear on a menu. So if I go back to the Application Explorer over here, if you don't see it, you can go to View Application Explorer, and then it pops up here. We want to go to User Interface. If you've never modified the Accounts Receivable menu before, you can go to Menus, right click on this Accounts Receivable and say Create Extension, and it'll create a new extension and add it to your project. In our case, we actually already have created a menu extension before, so I'm going to expand this menu extensions, find the one I created before, it's this one right here, and then you can right click and say add to project. That's going to add this existing extension to the project, and I want to add to it. That's just cleaner if instead of creating a bunch of new separate extensions, we always just keep one and add to it. It means all of our customizations to this menu are in one place. So now I can right click and say open to open it up. I can see the bolded files are the ones where I've added some changes. I've got a tutorials folder, and I even created an upload files submenu. You can do that by right clicking and saying new submenu, and then you can give that submenu a label. I just called it upload files. All right, and then you take this action menu item. The easiest way is to just drag it onto your submenu, and then it gets added here. And that's really it. You don't need to do anything else with this action menu item. Afterwards, you want to build your solution. So go up to build solution, wait for that to run, and then go back to your D365 instance. So here we are. I can delete this again, and we can kind of run through it once more just to see it all together. So I'll delete out my data. I'll go to Accounts Receivable, go to Upload Files submenu, call tutorial upload file. This action menu item is going to call the call tutorial upload file class, which is going to call my tutorial upload file class which I can see right here. And that file class is really nice. It does all of this for us, sets the labels here, the browse button, the field. I can select it, select my CSV file, and I've included that in my article if you want an example. Click open. It's going to run it. It's going to import it. Here's all my info logs of what it's printed out. But even if I didn't have those info logs, I could come here and then see that, yes, my data has been inserted. So that's really it. Reading in a file is really straightforward. This can be a quick way of uploading some data. You can also run some X++ code on that data before you insert it in or take some action. This is really helpful when you've got a lot of data that you're working with and you wouldn't want to take all of these actions by hand. Again, using the data management framework and data entities are often preferred, especially with more complex data sets, but this can be really helpful and be a little quicker sometimes to create. So hopefully you've learned something new today. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you watching. If you liked the video, click the like button. I also invite you to push the subscribe button as well. If there's other topics you would like to see a video on, please post in the comments and I'll see what I can do. I hope you learned something new today. Thank you.